The rain came down in cold sheets, slicing through the silence like a blade. Somewhere between dusk and midnight, she stood soaked to the bone, barefoot on moss and stone. Her eyes were locked on the figure, slumped against the twisted roots of a dying oak. He wasn't supposed to be here, nobody was. But he sat there, blind eyes closed, a violin resting across his knees. She hadn't spoken. Not a word. Not yet. Her test had begun the moment she let him live. He didn't see her, but somehow he knew. "Are you here to finish it?" the man asked, voice barely above a whisper. She said nothing. She needed to know what he would do. Would he beg? Would he run? Would he trust her? The woods had always kept secrets, and now, so did she. The air reeked of damp leaves and something unspoken. A distant owl screamed. The man lifted the bow. Slowly, defiantly. She didn't move. He played a single note. It cracked like glass in the dark. And in that moment, the woods listened. So did she. Earlier that day, she'd burned her last bridge. The school board had dismissed her without ceremony. Another failed teacher in a system that didn't want her mind, only her obedience. She'd walked out, clutching a cardboard box of her life, into a world that now felt colder than ever. She didn't cry. She couldn't. Not after what they'd taken from her. But even then, she had one secret. One final plan. They thought they'd broken her. But the forest, this forest, was the place she'd chosen. Not for escape. For the test. She had to know if humanity deserved the second chance she was preparing. The man had wandered into the forest days ago. Blind since birth, yet somehow drawn by sound. The whispering winds, the rustle of leaves, the echoing hush of unseen creatures. He'd carried nothing but his violin and an old thermos. He wasn't lost. Not in the way people meant. He was searching. Not for a place. For a moment. For a reason. His world had always been darkness, but the forest hummed with something he understood. Each note he played helped him feel the world's shape. He believed something was listening. He didn't know it yet. But she was. She had watched him long before he reached the clearing. From high in the pines, cloaked by branches and breathless purpose. He played music that didn't ask for attention, it offered it. Every note told her more about him than any confession could. She tested people differently now. No questions. No explanations. Only observation. When he reached the dying oak, he sat like he knew it was the place. She waited. Days passed. He stayed. Playing for no one. Speaking to no one. Except perhaps to her. She descended today. Silent as mist. Not to speak. To stand. To witness. Would he feel fear? Or peace? The test was not about knowledge or answers. It was about reaction. Human nature, under pressure. That's what they never understood in the city. Her students, her supervisors. That beneath every reaction lived a truth no test could fake. As he raised the bow, unaware of her nearness, she felt it. The truth breaking through. It sounded like a single note. It echoed like a decision. The sound lingered longer than any note should. It wasn't perfect, slightly off-key, raw like an open wound. But that's why she felt it. It wasn't music. It was memory, breaking free. She took a step forward, the earth soft beneath her. Her presence shifted the air, made the trees lean ever so slightly. He paused, the bough trembling in his grip. "You're still there, aren't you?" he asked. His voice was not afraid. It was steady, sad, and heavy with something deeper. "I don't know who you are, but I think you've been watching me." She didn't answer. Couldn't. Not yet. He nodded slightly, as if receiving a reply anyway. "Good," he said. "Then maybe you'll understand why I play." The bow descended again. She felt herself holding her breath. Every move he made was a response, unfiltered, unrehearsed. Her test was unfolding without her intervention. And still, she watched. Back in the city, sound had always meant chaos. Sirens, phones, dut, yelling, and silence. Silence meant something was wrong. But here, every sound had space. Every silence had meaning. She realized then, this man had no sight. But he saw more than most. Every shift in the wind, every raindrop on bark, each insect buzzing past, it was part of his language. A language he'd spent years trying to teach to children who never listened. Yet he, without knowing, spoke fluently in something purer. She walked a slow circle around him, her boots sinking into soaked leaves. Still, he didn't turn. He just played. "You're not going to hurt me," he said softly. "I don't think you ever were." The note stretched again, mournful and thin like breath fading in winter. And she felt, just for a second, that he might be right. But the test wasn't over. Not yet. His music faltered. Not from fear, but fatigue. His shoulders slumped. The bow dropped to his side. For a moment, the forest grew louder in his silence. She stopped walking. Something in her shifted, an old memory scratching through. A student once had cried in her class. Everyone laughed. She hadn't stopped them. That guilt had followed her like a shadow. She studied the man now, this stranger who had no audience but played anyway. Not for pity. Not even for hope. For honesty. His head bowed. He whispered, "Sometimes, I wonder if anyone's still real." Her fingers twitched at her side. Still, she said nothing. The test wasn't about answers. It was about reflection. If his truth could shine without knowing someone listened, then maybe the world still had a chance. She finally sat down. A few feet away, on a rock slick with moss. The rain eased, the sky holding its breath. Her soaked clothes clung to her, but she no longer felt the cold. "What's your name?" he asked gently, not turning. She hesitated. Speaking would shift the balance. But she whispered, "Eve." It wasn't the name she was born with, but it was the one she chose for this test. He smiled faintly. "Eve, like beginnings." She raised an eyebrow. "More like restarts," she muttered. He let out a breath, almost a laugh. "That still counts." For the first time, her voice had entered the forest. It rippled through the mist, small but undeniable. The test was evolving. And maybe, just maybe, she was too. They sat in silence. A silence that wasn't awkward. It was earned. The forest adjusted around them. A squirrel darted across a branch above. The wind moved more gently now. His hand tapped the violin's frame once, then again. "You're not the first to watch me," he said. "But you're the first to stay." She turned her head, studying him. He looked fragile, but something in him was indestructible. "What are you looking for?" she asked, her voice thin. "Not looking," he said, "just listening, hoping." Eve felt a sharp pang in her chest. She used to be that person too. Before the betrayals, before the institutions hollowed her out. "Do you think humanity deserves to be saved?" she asked suddenly. He paused. The wind stilled. Then he answered, "Maybe not. But that's not the same as saying it shouldn't be." And with that, her test gained a new variable. The rain stopped. Just like that. As if the forest itself was waiting for what came next. Eve looked up, the canopy still dripping from memory. The man sat quietly, not touching his violin, his face tilted skyward. "It's strange," he said. "I know when the rain ends, not by sound, by pressure, the silence it leaves behind." She studied him, unsure whether to be impressed or unnerved. "Do you always speak in riddles?" she asked. He smiled. "Only when the answers aren't ready." She almost laughed. Almost. But something gnawed inside her. This man, this stranger with broken sight and perfect hearing, was pulling truths from her without asking. "Why did you come here?" she asked suddenly. He answered without pause. "Because I had nowhere else to go that wasn't already lost." The words pierced her. That had been her reason too. Except she didn't want refuge. She wanted proof. And somehow, this man was offering both. Eve stood and paced, the wet leaves squelching beneath her boots. "You talk like you've lost everything," she said. He didn't move. "Haven't you?" She paused, her back to him. Her fists clenched. "I lost my job. I lost respect, but I'm not some sad poet in the woods." He turned his head slightly toward her voice. "No, you're something rarer. You stayed." That word again. Stayed. It echoed louder than the violin ever could. She clenched her jaw, voice trembling. "I didn't stay for you." "I know," he said. "But you're still here." The trees around them whispered. Eve hated how right he sounded. She hated that he was unafraid, that he spoke like he saw her better than she saw herself. Her test was crumbling. Or maybe it was beginning to work. "I tested people for years," Eve said bitterly, her voice slicing through the hush. "Students, parents, colleagues, no one passed." The man tilted his head. "What were the questions?" She hesitated. "I didn't ask any." A long silence. Then he said, "Maybe that's why." She turned to him slowly, stunned by the simplicity of it. "They didn't care," she whispered. "They followed rules. They obeyed. But they didn't care." He nodded gently. "You wanted meaning." Her breath caught. For a moment, she saw her classroom again. Empty desks. Her trembling hand on a paper filled with red marks. She thought she'd left it behind, but it had followed her. The man continued, "If we're only measured by what we obey, we're not living." She sat again, closer this time. The violin returned to his hands. But this time he didn't play for her. He played for himself. A slow, haunting melody unfurled, fractured yet whole, the sound of a soul rebuilding. Eve closed her eyes. Every note pulled her back through time, to the little girl she once was, reading under blankets, waiting for someone to notice. To the teenager who shouted at the system and was told to quiet down. To the woman who tried to teach truth and was punished for not teaching compliance. The music grew deeper. And just when it swelled towards something close to joy, it cracked. A note faltered. He stopped. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of everything they both couldn't say. Eve looked at him differently now. Not as a subject. Not as a puzzle. But as something rare. Someone who didn't flinch when faced with nothingness. She whispered, "You said you weren't looking for anything." He nodded. "And yet you found me," she added. A long pause. "Maybe," he said, "we both found something we didn't expect." The test was no longer theoretical. She was part of it now. The woods, once her stage for silent judgment, had turned into a mirror. And in it, she saw a woman who had been searching for a reason to believe. "Can I hear it again?" she asked. He smiled. "It only works if someone's really listening." She nodded. This time, she was. The second melody was different. Slower. Wiser. It didn't ache the way the first had. It lingered with something gentler, like breath after crying. Eve leaned back, eyes closed. She was no longer measuring. No longer analyzing. She was simply feeling. The forest, too, seemed to soften. Birds rustled above, and somewhere far off, a brook murmured. For the first time in months, Eve allowed herself to remember the sound of her own laughter. The real kind. The kind that used to surprise her. A tear slipped from her eye, unnoticed. The man's fingers moved without hesitation, drawing truths from the strings like a confession with no shame. "I never asked your name," she whispered. "Jonah," he replied, never pausing. Eve smiled faintly. Jonah. It fit him. Gentle. Anchored. Biblical, even. The name of a man swallowed by something bigger than himself, yet still found his way out. Jonah's song slowed to a hum, then faded. He lowered the bow, exhaling as if it had been his breath all along. Eve opened her eyes. Where did you learn that? She asked softly. Nowhere, Jonah said. It's just what I feel. You can't see, but you hear more than anyone I've met. Maybe seeing gets in the way, he replied. She smiled, but it didn't last. What if I told you, she began carefully, that you were part of something bigger? That someone brought you here for a reason. He turned his head slightly toward her. I'd say I already know that. She froze. How? Because you're still here, Jonah said. And you haven't left. That means I was supposed to stay. She blinked slowly. Her test hadn't gone unnoticed. And still, he stayed. You're not surprised? She asked. That I've been testing you. Jonah shook his head. People test each other all the time. Most just don't admit it. Eve looked down, ashamed. I wanted to see if someone could still act from kindness without knowing they were being watched. And, he asked. You did, she said. You passed. Jonah smiled, not triumphant, but gentle. That's good, he said. But it wasn't a test for me. It was a question for you. Eve looked up sharply. What do you mean? You weren't watching me to judge me, Jonah said. You were watching me to remember who you were. The air felt heavy again. Not with sadness, but truth. Eve stood, suddenly overwhelmed. She paced again, arms wrapped around herself. I spent my whole life trying to be seen, she said. By students, by coworkers, by anyone. But no one ever really looked, not like you. Jonah listened silently. She turned to him, eyes wide with something close to panic. Why didn't you run, when you knew someone was watching you? He answered simply, because I hoped they needed me as much as I needed them. Her breath caught. You're blind, but you still saw me. I heard you, he corrected. And that was enough. She dropped to her knees in the wet moss, finally breaking. I didn't think anyone could pass the test. Jonah reached out slowly. His fingers didn't touch hers. But they didn't have to. She felt it anyway. The wind returned. Light at first, then stronger. Branches above them creaked, releasing their final drops. Eve rose slowly, brushing the wet earth from her knees. Jonah tilted his head. Something's changed, he said. Yes, she replied. Mean. He nodded once. Then maybe now, you're ready to decide. She stared at him. This stranger, this blind musician, had become her mirror. Her proof. Her answer. She came to test humanity. But what she really tested was her own hope in it. And Jonah, without ever seeing her face, had brought it back. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small notebook, its pages warped by damp. On the first page she wrote just one word, begin. Then she looked at Jonah and said, Let's go. He stood, violin in hand, and followed. No questions. Just trust. They walked in silence at first, the only sound, the wet earth beneath their feet, and the gentle hum of Jonah's violin case shifting on his back. Eve glanced sideways at him. He didn't stumble, didn't hesitate. It was as if the forest was guiding him. You really can't see anything? She asked. Not in the way you do, he replied. But I see in other ways. She nodded, not fully understanding, but accepting. They passed a fallen log, covered in moss like a green wound stitched across the earth. Jonah reached out, fingers brushing the surface. This place feels alive, he said. It is, Eve answered. More than most cities I've known. They weren't heading anywhere specific. But both knew it wasn't the same place they'd started. With each step, she shed a layer of doubt, and he carried her silence as gently as his instrument. They stopped beside a stream, its waters swollen from the rain. Jonah knelt, letting his fingers dip into the icy flow. I remember cold like this, he said quietly. My mother used to wash my hands in mountain water. Said it woke up the soul. Eve crouched nearby, hugging her arms. She sounds kind. She was, Jonah said. Until the world made her hard. His voice didn't accuse, it mourned. Eve looked into the stream's reflection. Two distorted figures stared back. She didn't recognize herself at first. "Do you think people can change?" she asked. Jonah took his time. "Only if they remember who they were before they forgot." That line hit harder than any punishment her school ever gave. The stream babbled on, like it had always known the answer. Eve sat on a rock near the stream, while Jonah unpacked his violin. He didn't ask permission. He simply played. This time the melody was lighter, hopeful, even playful. The notes danced with the breeze, skipping over the water like stones. Eve smiled without meaning to. "You always play what I need to hear," she said. Jonah nodded slightly. "That's because I listen before I begin." Eve stared into the trees, mind drifting. All those years she spoke to rooms of students, and no one really heard. She had raised her voice, sharpened her tone, polished her lectures, but never asked if they were ready to listen. "Do you think I was ever a good teacher?" she asked. Jonah didn't answer with words. He played a new phrase, slow, steady, full of something that sounded like forgiveness. The music ended, replaced by the rustle of leaves and the chatter of distant birds. Jonah lowered his violin, breathing evenly. Eve stood, dusting off her jeans. "You know, I never told anyone this," she began. "But I used to imagine leaving everything, not just the school, the whole city, the noise, the pressure, the pretending. I thought if I could vanish, maybe I'd find something real." Jonah said nothing. She continued, "Then I realized I wasn't looking for real. I was looking for right. For something to feel right." He turned toward her voice. "And now I think it's not about finding it," she said. "It's about becoming it." For the first time, she didn't just speak with her voice. She spoke with her truth. They walked again, deeper into the woods. The terrain grew steeper, more unpredictable, but Jonah never stumbled. Eve followed, this time letting him lead. The trees opened into a high ridge with a sweeping view of the valley below, mist curling over distant hills like breath on glass. "It's beautiful," Eve whispered. Jonah smiled. "Describe it to me." She hesitated, then began. "The sky is pale silver, streaked with light. The hills ripple like waves under clouds. The trees, they look like a sea of reaching hands." Jonah let out a soft breath. "Thank you." It was the first time Eve saw the world through someone else's absence, and gave it shape through presence. They stood together, silent, watching the valley inhale. This was no longer a test. It was a beginning. They descended the ridge slowly, the air thinning into silence. The valley below wasn't marked on any map. No trails. No signs. Just wild land untouched by expectation. Jonah walked ahead, his steps instinctive. Eve followed, her thoughts heavy. "How long have you lived this way?" she asked. "Alone, in the woods." He paused. "Since the world got too loud to hear myself." She nodded. "I used to drown in that noise too." The trees grew denser again, older, their trunks wide and scarred by time. "But the silence here," he continued, "it doesn't push you away. It pulls you back to yourself." Eve touched one of the trees as they passed. The bark was rough, gnarled, and real. She realized she hadn't felt something that honest in years. "I came out here thinking I'd test the world," she whispered. "Turns out it's been testing me the whole time." Jonah smiled, but said nothing. Some truths didn't need answers. A clearing emerged unexpectedly, circular and sunlit, as if the forest had opened a secret just for them. In the center, a rusted bench stood, half swallowed by moss and time. Jonah stopped. "I come here when I need to remember," he said. Eve sat on the bench without hesitation. "Remember what?" "That I'm not alone," he said. She looked around. No people. No signs. Just nature, reclaiming space. "I don't see anyone," she said. "They were here once, and their presence stayed." Eve closed her eyes and listened. Birds sang. Wind rustled. Leaves whispered. It wasn't loneliness, it was legacy. Did you lose someone here? She asked. Jonah nodded slowly. Many someones. But they weren't taken. They faded. That's different. She didn't ask more. Grief had its own language, and this place spoke it gently. Jonah sat beside her. When I play here, it's not for the living, he said. It's for the echoes. Eve didn't interrupt. He lifted the violin once more. The notes this time were weightless, like threads of breath or memory finding their way home. Eve didn't cry, but her chest ached with something close to mourning. For the years she lost. For the children she couldn't reach. For the version of herself she buried beneath ambition. The music wrapped around her like a blanket stitched from everything she'd never said. When the final note landed, it didn't end. It simply settled. Jonah lowered the violin slowly. Some music is meant to be heard by trees, he said. And ghosts. Eve nodded. And people who thought they were broken. As the light dimmed, clouds rolled in again. The forest darkened, not with threat, but with anticipation. Jonah packed the violin away with reverence. Eve stood, brushing moss from her legs. You said you lost people, she said. What did you do after? Jonah turned toward her. I listened to what stayed behind. She frowned. The echoes? The lessons? He corrected. Their mistakes, their grace, their silence. Eve breathed in deeply. I think I've been running from my own echoes. Then maybe it's time to stop, he said. She looked toward the trees and imagined her classroom, the empty chairs, the unspoken apologies, the love she never showed out of fear. What if I don't like what I hear? Then rewrite it, Jonah said. That's what music is. Rewritten silence. They left the clearing in silence, dusk folding around them like a blanket. Their steps were slower now, not from fatigue, but from meaning. The trail forked ahead, splitting in two. Jonah stopped. You don't need me to lead anymore, he said. Eve looked at the two paths, one wild and steep, the other calm and narrow. What if I choose wrong? She asked. There are no wrong ways, Jonah replied. Only ones you walk with your whole self. She stepped forward, choosing the wilder path. I think I've had enough of safe roads. Jonah nodded. Then maybe now, the world can begin again. They didn't say goodbye. He turned down the other path. And as they walked away from each other, the forest held them both, one letting go, the other just starting. The forest faded behind her as Eve walked into the unknown. Her body ached, but her spirit surged. The path twisted uphill, roots snagging her boots, branches brushing her face like soft reminders of everything she'd endured. She didn't look back. Jonah had become part of the forest now, an echo stitched into her story. The clouds broke above, letting strips of morning light guide her. She reached a ridge where the land unfolded like a secret, rolling hills, distant rooftops, and far beyond, the silver shimmer of a town awakening. Her town. The one that dismissed her. The one that never saw her. She stood still, breath visible in the cold dawn. Not out of fear, but clarity. She had tested humanity, but she had found her own. And now, the world waited, not to judge her return, but to feel the sound she would bring with her. Eve entered the town like a ghost reclaimed, familiar streets, unfamiliar eyes. The school building loomed ahead, smaller than she remembered. The walls hadn't changed, but she had. She walked through the front doors unannounced, each step steady. Staff glanced up in confusion. Whispers rippled. Is that her? Didn't she get fired? What is she doing here? Eve didn't flinch. She stepped into the classroom she once ruled, now quiet, hollow. The new teacher, young and startled, stepped aside without a word. Eve walked to the board, uncapped a marker, and wrote a single sentence. What would you do if no one was watching? Then she turned to the students, most of them blinking, unsure. I came to listen, she said. And that's when they started to look, really look. The question she'd written lingered in the air. One boy raised his hand. Can we answer out loud? Eve nodded. One by one, hesitant voices grew bold. They spoke of fear, hope, anger, joy, real things, not textbook echoes. Eve didn't teach that day. She listened. She asked questions. She let the silence stretch until it turned into thought. The class didn't look like a lesson. It looked like a conversation. For the first time, her presence wasn't authority. It was invitation. Somewhere in the back a girl whispered, "I wish class was always like this." Eve heard it. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Because they were passing a test no one had written. One she had only just begun to understand. Weeks passed. Eve didn't reclaim her job. She redefined it. Her classroom became a place of sound, not just voices but truths. Students brought instruments, poems, questions with no answers. They sat on floors, stood at windows, drew on walls. She didn't enforce silence anymore. She nurtured resonance. News spread. Other teachers peeked in. Some scoffed. Others stayed. And then one afternoon, Eve placed a violin on her desk. The same one Jonah had left for her, wrapped in canvas, tied with string. No note. Just trust. She played a single note. It cracked in the air, imperfect. And the students listened. Truly listened. That was when she knew. This wasn't a return. It was a revolution. On the last day of the season, Eve stood alone on the edge of the school roof. The town buzzed below, cars, voices, life. But she heard something else. A faint note. Distant, almost impossible. But it was there. Jonah's violin. Not literal. Not physical. But present. She smiled. Not all stories need to end with reunion. Some echo through those we change. She reached into her coat, pulled out her notebook, and flipped to the last page. She wrote, "He never saw me, but he heard everything." Then closed it. The wind picked up. The bell rang. And as students spilled from the building in a rush of sound and color, Eve turned and joined them. One of many. No longer testing. Just living.